Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of our RANT series. Today, we've got back on the show for first time in about a month or two, I think. George and Craig Sybert. Welcome to the show once again, my friends. Good to see you. How you guys doing through all this lockdown craziness we're going through?
Well, I'd say we've all three got a different perspective. I live in Florida. Craig's around the D.C. area, and you're in New York, so we've probably got all ends of the spectrum pegged, I would say.
Yeah. I'd say that, I'm probably handling it better than most because my company was distance training anyways. So it hasn't been extremely strenuous for me. And my son just came out of homeschooling and went into regular school. So now he's back to homeschooling. So I handled it a little bit different. How about you, Pete?
I mean, I work from home anyway, so really not much has changed for me.
But man, you need a haircut.
I was supposed to go like 5 weeks ago. I mean, not that I mind it, to be honest with you, but at this point, it's gotten to the point where I don't care now. It's like, all right, there's no end in sight. I don't see my hair cutter. She's not opening anytime soon. So you know what? I'm just dealing with it. Okay, whatever.
It's funny.
Such is life.
Such is life. So today's topic of conversation on this rant, and this is actually, I think, Craig, this came from you, I believe. This was originally your idea. So we were talking about album lengths. What is the correct length for an album? And that started a little discussion amongst the three of us about, CD length, and was the original LP length the best, or cassette, or whatever. I mean, we see classic albums that are 38 minutes long, 28 minutes long, 70 minutes long. I think in today's age, I think there's people get fatigued with long albums, whereas back in the day, I think people welcome them because they didn't happen that often. But yet some of the greatest albums in history are like 35 minutes long. And I know there are some people who wish it would go back to that, even though the year, the time of the album is not what it used to be. So I figured we just kind of kick this around a little bit and get some perspective on, how long should a really good album be? And maybe we can throw some examples of classics that are exactly as they should be, or classics that should have been longer or should have been shorter. Maybe a really good album that was too long should have been a little shorter to be a classic album. I don't know. There's a lot of ways we can go here. So one of you guys kick us off and give us some perspective.
I'm going to start it because I came up with the idea for a reason. And the reason is I started running. I started doing Couch to 5K. And we had a discussion on one of our podcasts with my original drummer for my band, Josh Bowles. And it was, what's your running mix? What do you do when you run? What do you listen to when you run? And I found that albums, if I put an album on, it's about 40 minutes, 41 minutes. So that's my warm up, my run, and a little bit of my cool down for the album. And a traditional LP is like 45 or 46 minutes, max is what you can put on them.
Max, yeah.
And it worked until I started listening to newer albums. And I'd put on a new album, like, why am I not to the last song? I'm almost done running. I'm about tired. What's going on? Because I try not to look at my time while I'm running. So, and then it made me think, wow, I hadn't really thought about the fact that, Led Zeppelin 1, Led Zeppelin 2, Led Zeppelin 3, those albums are right around 39 to 41 minutes. And that's almost perfect for running time for me, because that's enough time to get warmed up and then run, get my 3 miles in and get out of it. And I know that what the last song is on those albums. I've listened to them 100 times. I know what that song is coming up to at the end of it. So it kind of made me think, man, what if they had CDs where you had 80 minutes? Or what if you had, unlimited time at digital media where you could do whatever you want and make an album? Would it have really changed what those were?
Tool.
Would Tool be able to make a single album? Would they all be double albums?
Song? You said a song would take up an album? Yes.
But some of the classics, Pete, you mentioned some of the classics, like if you think about The Wall by Pink Floyd being 2 albums because it was over that amount, like that gave them enough room to kind of do what they wanted to do with, with the story that they were trying to tell. And could they have told that story in one CD? Could they have, if they went from, what did we say it was, 46? So you're looking at a little over 80 for 2 albums. So could they have even done that in a CD? What would they have had to cut? Or if it was digital, like now, man, they could have just written like an epic story of 250 minutes of audio.
It could have, because there's a lot of more modern artists, especially like you talk about Pink Floyd in the progressive rock genre, who are putting out single CDs that are pushing the boundaries of 80 minutes on a single. And then they're doing a double album, and it's close to 2 hours of music, which
exactly
for me is that's way overkill. That's way too much. But, you know, Pink Floyd's a good example. I mean, I haven't totaled it up, but I wonder what the total length of the wall is. I bet you it's not much over 80, like normal CD length. It probably isn't much more than that.
Right. Well, I did a couple of minutes worth of research. It says basically 40 minutes for your pressed wax vinyl LP. So, I mean, 20 minutes per side, roughly. Any more than that, and the grooves got too narrow to get the full sound or something to that
lost
effect.
Quality.
And then CDs were roughly like I think it was 79 minutes and 59 seconds, basically maximum on a standard issue LP CD. So you're looking at almost double the length. But Craig brought up a good point. Most of the bands, I don't think it was ever an issue, because if they wanted to make longer songs or longer, they just made a double album. There's triple albums even that they made.
But then they had to fill that second album.
No, but I'm saying they wrote enough music to.
So George is saying they already had the material. So
yeah,
I'm sure the record company was telling them not to do that, because then you have to charge more money. And record companies were very leery of that, although a lot of best-selling double albums back in the day.
Physical Graffiti was a double album.
Those first three Chicago albums. I mean,
the
live, all those live albums are all doubles, most of them.
Electric Ladyland by Jimi Hendrix, Layla and other sort of love songs, Derek and the Dominoes, Tommy and Quadrophenia by The Who,
double platinum,
Made in Japan by Deep Purple,
Deep Purple, yep.
Out of the Blue, ELO. They're all epically long albums and they're all back when that's all they could do. I think if artists had that much material built up, the record company said, you know what, fine. I mean, if you want to put all that onto, one double album, instead of putting an album out now and putting an album out late, 6 months from now, a year from now, save that material. I think it was a risk. It was like, from a money-making standpoint, it was a risk for the record labels, for the record companies to say, hey, you can make a lot more money if you put one out now and you put one out 6 months from now, rather than making one double album and just putting all your cards on the table now. That's almost having to guarantee you had enough material to make a third album a year from now, because we talked about this in past podcasts and past things about how often records came out back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, because there wasn't that digital technology where you could not share it immediately, and you had to wait for it, and you had to produce. They were on the road touring and writing new music, so a double album was almost like a dare. It was almost like, I would say pretty ballsy back then, really, that you had that much material written down to make a CD to make two vinyl, to make a CD length. Because, I mean, if you're talking two records, that's 80 minutes. You're talking a CD. So that's why Physical Graffiti is on one CD and two vinyl albums.
Yeah. So it's interesting, that perspective, and how many more modern artists are basically putting out what were once double albums, single release. And granted, they're taking 3, 4, 5 years in between releases. But that's what they're doing. And then, so instead of getting a really tight 8 or 9 songs, maybe 10, you're getting like 15.
Right.
And how many times have you guys listened to a more modern recording post 1990, where by track number 11, you're like, oh, all right.
Done. I'm out.
Right? It's just too much. It's too much. And a lot of metal bands do that. I can't tell you how many more modern metal albums I've listened to on CD. It's like 14, 15 tracks. I'm like, oh man, it's like I'm burnt out at like 9 or 10. It's like enough already.
And the songs feel forced, and not necessarily towards the end of the album, but there's some in the middle that, you can tell they kind of mixed it up a little bit, and you get to some of those middle songs and you're like, it doesn't really feel like something they would have done. It
In
feels
other
like
words, filler. A filler has been a very popular term in recent years, right?
Yeah,
it's like
it's
there's
a
too much
song.
filler. And how many times did you hear filler back in the day? Very rarely. I mean, I've heard people, you talk about double albums. I've heard people say that Physical Graffiti has a little bit of filler. The Beatles, the White Album, has a little bit of filler. I don't think so, really. I mean, maybe you could say, all right, 1, 2 tracks maybe aren't up to the standards of the rest of the album, but filler, I don't know about that.
So the Beatles White Album is a good one. Would if you had to step back and look at it from their point of view of filler, are there 2 songs that you could pull off of there? Are there 2 songs that could come off that album that you would say, because they were trying to fill an album at the time, could they have left that off and made the perfect album? Or vice versa? What was after White? Was Revolver after White?
No, it was after the White Album was Abbey Road.
Okay, so could have something of Abbey Road been on White and made it more complete of an album? Because that's what we're talking about here. Is we're talking about the time. They were constrained by that 46 minutes of time of putting something down, and whether they either we lost George again. Whether they either had to fill, or whether they had to put filler in, to fill that spot, or whether they had to cut off something, was what we're talking about. You don't have to do that anymore. Bands are free to do basically whatever they want right now. Yeah. You can release something that is, like you said, 250 minutes long if you really want to release an album like that. Could they have taken something off Abbey Road, put it on White, and said, this is a better album. This is a better song instead of that filler album? Oh, yeah, let him back in.
He's waiting.
So is there a song that was on Abbey Road that would have replaced something on White that would have made it better, that would have made it the better fit, or added on to White to make it a better album, make it something more solid? I'd have to go back and look at the tracks on those songs. I can't remember exactly what the tracks on those songs are, but I have a feeling that they were pretty close. There was only a couple of years apart on those, right?
A year maybe, because they were basically pumping out albums like crazy, and Abbey Road was their last time in the studio together. I mean, even though Let It Be came out afterwards, that was actually recorded just before. But I don't know. I mean, it's you get a lot of mixed opinions on it. There are a lot of people who say the White Album needed to be trimmed. There are other people who say it's perfect as it is. I mean, could you probably pull out maybe 2 or 3 tracks on there? Yeah, like I said, I'd have to really go and think about it and look at the track list and say, all right, what can I kind of do without? I don't know if I'd want to do without any of them. But then again, you bring up like Revolver or Rubber Soul or even Sgt. Pepper. Those are pretty short albums. So could they have taken some of those and like spread them around a little bit? I don't know. But I think, the White Album is looked at as one of the classic double albums of all time.
Sure. Well, and you kind of look at, I mean, you're a little bit bigger on the history behind the scenes than we are, but if they would have, a band would have come to a record company and said, we only got 6 songs, it's only going to be about 32 minutes. What do they say? I mean, do they tell them, sorry, you got to come back with something else and you have to build filler? Or do
that happen a lot? That happened often, though. I mean, look at Black Sabbath Paranoid album. They were short, and they told the record company, said, go back in the studio and come up with another song. They went in and put together the song Paranoid in like 5 minutes, and boom, that finished at the album and became the most popular song on the album. So go figure. So that's probably happened more than once, I would think.
Would have to.
But I want to go back to, you started off the conversation talking about Led Zeppelin. And I wanted to go back and take a look at some of these real classics in rock history that were fairly short albums that most people would agree are legendary albums. So those first couple Zeppelin albums for sure. Some of those great early Rolling Stones albums, those first couple Kiss albums.
Yeah.
Boston's first album, all those albums are like top to bottom, Fleetwood Mac Rumors, top to bottom, maybe 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes. Classics, not a weak track on any of them. If they could they make those albums even better by throwing an extra song or 2 or 3 on them? Or are they the way they are, the way they should have been?
Well, here's my thought on it. And I'm going to jump in before George does. I know he probably wants to jump in, especially since I got a Boston background now. But so they had that in their head when they were making these albums. So when they sat down to record, they knew that there was a limit, and it had been a limit. I mean, when did records start? Late 1800s, maybe early 1900s, when, I guess that actual size probably was in the 20s or 30s or something when they started that actual size of LP. But, everybody knew there was no other option out there. Well, that was 60, was it 69 when the first one came out? 68? What year was the first Led Zeppelin album?
Oh, that was 1969. Yeah.
Yeah.
So remember, I think they both came out in the same year, because a lot of these bands were just pumping out 2-3 albums a year nonstop. So yes, they had all those songs ready to go. They could have put them all on one, but they didn't. So we lost George again. Oh, he's back.
Yeah. So the odd side note, I didn't realize the cassette was actually invented before the 8-track, but interestingly enough, this cassette came out in 62, but it wasn't widely used until the 80s. So they knew that it was a fixed time. They knew that when they sat down and wrote songs, they were going to have to either cut something because they had written so many songs, or they were going to have to put something else on it. So I don't know if they would have had years of knowledge building up to that of, we don't have to worry about this. We're just going to write songs because we love to write songs. 1 and 2 could have been a CD. 1 and 2 could have been a digital release of all these songs on one.
Think about that. I think Led Zeppelin 1 and 2 on one record, probably the greatest album of all time, right?
Yeah, I could imagine, 3, they started kind of going off in a little bit of a different tangent. 4, they kind of started coming back to the original, but 1 and 2, if you put those two together as a single release, I mean, I'm tempted to do it myself now, is just put it on a digital disc or something, or a digital, drive, and just go sit and listen to it, back and front that way. And again, you're talking about side and side too. You also have to time it out for sides. Like they if they looked at 4 songs and they really wanted those 4 songs to go together, but it went to 28 minutes, they can't put it that way. So, look at the timing on some of those songs. If you look at the song on B side and flip it over and see that it doesn't fit on A, that might've been why they put it there. So I think albums like that, albums like, even like, Born to Run by, Springsteen. That's an album that I don't think could have fit anything else. I think the songs on there are what they are. I think there might be one filler song on that, but if you put anything else on an album, I think it would ruin that album. So I don't know if these guys had so much of that ingrained in their head that they were worried about putting together an album that fit the time frame, that they might have restricted themselves. They might have only written certain songs, and good or bad, I think it affected them mentally. I think they had to be thinking about it when they were creating albums. And is George back on?
I hear. I mean,
yeah.
Okay. Well, what's your take on that?
Well, I didn't hear some of the conversation. My Zoom keeps kicking out. But to me, it's a lot like you said, I mean, if I always thought, like, if they had a certain amount of time, and this, like The Wall, that's telling like an entire story. So you can't like stop on side 1, like in the middle of a song. It has to play out. I mean, they had to write and record that.
Good point.
Like, so there was that, the time, for lack of a better Pink Floyd reference, had to be on their mind. They really had to, they had to be aware of that when they were only recording not album, but they were recording albums, but they're recording LPs. Like they knew they had a certain amount of time, and you touched on it, Craig. Where you literally have to be aware of how long the songs are. Because if you've got 5 songs, they have to be less than 4 minutes to be on one side, or, plus or minus. But like, I was doing some of the research of some of the double albums like I listened to. Rancid had a double album. It was all punk songs, and the longest song wasn't even 3 minutes. It was like 2 minutes and 53 seconds.
A lot of songs you can cram onto a double album if they're only 2 or 3 minutes long.
Yeah,
right?
they put 23 songs on a double album.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. So, and the only reason I bring that up is because every time I listened to that, I'm like, why are there 23 songs that are 2 minutes long, a minute and a half long, minute 40 long? Why not just make one? Why not make that and then save it for the next one? Because it's not like it's punk song. It's not like they're telling a story or running congruent or like having to line them up to make sense of them. They're just 2 minute, punk songs. So I always wondered, when this come up, that was one of the first ones I thought of. Was that and like Tommy by The Who, like how that had to function to tell the story versus the movie part of that.
And Tommy works perfectly beginning to end.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
In fact, if you go back and listen to any of the Who live recordings from that era where they would go out and play Tommy, but not in its entirety, because it would be missing like maybe 3 or 4 tracks from the whole rock opera. You miss them. You miss them when you hear it live. It's like, that's not the whole Tommy, it's most of it, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't really sound right.
Yeah, it's got to be complete.
You're missing part of the story.
No, but and maybe that's I don't know if it's a bad talent or a good talent, but maybe it's definitely a lost talent, because you do have to look at, especially the Wall and Tommy. I mean, if you're sitting down and you're writing these songs and you're writing them to be a story, you have to be extremely aware that if you're writing this last song that's going to be on the last 10 or 6 minute song or 5 minute song, you can't write another verse. You can't write a third chorus at the end of it. You have to take that chorus out. It's got to have warped everything they thought about when they were writing those songs, as compared to what musicians get to do nowadays, where they just kind of write.
They have the artistic freedom to do almost whatever they want. But back in the day, you had a record company that was like, you know what? We're not releasing the double album, so cut that shit down, right? I mean, that would happen all the time. But not every band was Pink Floyd who were allowed that freedom.
Sure. And they're also, artists are now releasing single tracks, like, just to get their name out there. They're not releasing albums, they're EPs and so on and so forth, that back in the day, I mean, I think when bands had too many songs or songs that didn't fit, they released an EP, like just a little bit. Here's 3 or 4 songs that didn't fit on the album. We couldn't make a double album, so we made like a partial,
or acoustic versions or live versions or
something. Exactly.
And now the EP is used almost as a stopgap to the next full length, right? So we know it's going to be 2-3 years. So, we
already had these songs in the can, so here you go.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I see that a lot. I want to bring up another instance here. And I don't know how much you guys ever listen to Jethro Tull at all, but they're a perfect example of the next thing I'm going to talk about. So here's an example of a band who went into the studio to record an album, and they had a whole bunch of songs. They recorded the album, again, 35, 40 minutes tops. And almost every instance, they had these leftover tracks, which were really strong, but they just couldn't fit them. So they kept them in the can to eventually either throw out as a B-side to a single, or they would put on a compilation release or whatever. But then when the CD era came and it was time to remaster all of these albums, they would then go take those extra studio tracks that they didn't use in the day and tack them on the CD at the back end of the album on CD. And now all of a sudden you have Aqualung or Benefit or Minstrel in the Gallery or Songs from the Wood or whatever, the original album, which is great, and then those extra couple of tracks, which almost makes the album even better. But not many bands did that.
Yeah, it was big for a while in the late 80s, even mid 90s. The Inconium, the Led Zeppelin set that came out with the 2 or 3 extra songs on it because they could stick them on there, and they reshuffled the songs around and they kind of put them how they wanted. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, about them revisiting their stuff. Yeah, that's interesting.
Definitely. Because I mean, there's a couple of bands, newer bands that I noticed, like 9 Inch Nails kind of did the same thing. Or does the same thing. He records like now. He's always been more on the digital side, but he's still he's still a big Trent Reznor is still a big believer in that, the authenticity of vinyl. So they had so many songs built up that they would release. I mean, they had a double album, The Fragile, that some of it's instrumental, some of it's just, basically white noise, and some of them are really great tracks. But I think I don't think very many bands do that anymore. I don't think they save. I'm sure there are some quality bands that still do that, but I think to a greater extent.
They release everything now. They record it, they release everything. And there's always this mystique, especially about the 70s bands, like, ooh, I wonder if there's any hidden tracks in the vault. There's no such thing as a vault anymore, right? It just doesn't, and it takes some of that mystique about like kind of that whole era. Like, how many times you hear people say, well, I wonder if Jimmy Page has any secret Zeppelin tunes that were never used back in the day. It's like,
how many times have I told you that there's got to be recordings of the songs from Back in Black with Bon Scott singing them somewhere? I know there is somewhere.
There's got to be, right? There's got to be.
There'd have to be some of that anyway, for sure.
But you brought up another good point. I know we're getting kind of close on time, but like Nirvana had a hidden track on their CD that was like you had to go 13 or 14 minutes past the end of their album to get this hidden track, and you couldn't do that obviously with LPs. Right. The CDs kind of opened that up. So even if you had the regular 46 minutes of time that would normally be on an LP, and you put it on a CD, you had that open space where you could just kind of do whatever you want, and secret songs and hidden songs and stuff like that too.
So many bands did that starting in the 90s into the 2000s, right? You'd have this like 10 minutes of silence, and then all of a sudden for 3 minutes in the end, and boop, goodbye. It's like, but you got to sift through all that. I'm like, come on, you couldn't put 3 songs there. That's like,
I used to lay in bed at night and like fall asleep listening to music, and I think it was Stone Temple Pilots. I think it's songs from the Vatican gift shop or something like that. Like, it's literally like a regular 11 or 12 song album, and then like it's literally the last 2 minutes of the 80-minute CD. So there's like 40 some minutes, and then a 20-minute gap. And I mean, in that gap fell dead asleep, and I mean, it scared the dog shit.
And you wake up and have a heart attack,
right? Like, what is that?
I'll tell a little side note. We probably didn't even bring this up in our little 50 episode, but there were nights where I would come in late after George was already home, and I would walk by his door, and he had a stereo sitting next to his bed, and he would have his headphones on, and I could hear Anthrax. I could hear it through. I'd crack his door, and I could hear Anthrax coming through, and the little lights on the stereo going up and down. So I know he listened to music when he was sleeping all the time.
I mean, I could have Anthrax on 3/4 volume and fall asleep. That's how. I mean, I could probably fall asleep at a concert back then. Now I can't fall asleep to save my life. But
see how that works.
Yeah, I know, right? Payback.
I'm telling you. Well, this was a fun little discussion about album lengths. Did we solve the dilemma? Probably not, but I think it'll be something that'll be talked about forever, even when there are no such thing as albums anymore, I'm sure. But an album, after all, is just a recorded piece of work, and whether it's 35 minutes, 50 minutes. There's people that love it all, right? So some people can't get. I think back in the day, people wanted longer albums. Now that we got longer albums, people want them shorter again. So nobody's
attention span of gnats.
That's right. That's right. So thanks to George and Craig for joining. They will be back momentarily. We've got another rant cooking, so stay tuned for that one. Also, visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Guys, let everybody know where they can find you on the internet here.
Email is musicmusingfeedback@gmail.com. You can go to Libsyn/musicmusing. If you look us up as Music Musing on any platform, we're out there on most podcast platforms. If you find one we're not on, let us know. We'll get on it.
Sounds good. Hopefully we'll get George's video working next time around. Oh, that's good. At least we see his face, even though he's kind of frozen.
It's a weird look, but yeah.
I'll restart this thing in between takes here.
Okay.
So, there you go. Sounds good. All right. Thanks everybody for joining, and stay tuned for another rant with the three of us. So we'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.
Yep.
All right. See ya.